Today we're going to go for a pony ride. Here's our pony. Do you have one too? You may get him and go galloping with us. Or maybe your mother will let you get out the hairy mop or the broom and use that one for a horse. It's also all right if mother says, no, not today for that. You can just pretend you have a horse and go galloping, galloping, galloping around the kitchen table or around the living room, maybe out on the porch, wherever mother says you should go today. Here we go. See the pony galloping, galloping down the country lane. See the pony galloping, galloping down the country lane. See the pony coming home, all tired out, all tired out, all tired out. Now he's rested. Let's go again. See the pony galloping, galloping down the country lane. See the pony galloping, galloping down the country lane. See the pony coming home, all tired out, all tired out, all tired out. Let's go for another ride. See the pony galloping, galloping down the country lane. See the pony galloping, galloping down the country lane. See the pony coming home, all tired out, all tired out, all tired out. Now let's sing Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, but let's make up new verses today. Now, one thing I think you're doing a lot of at your house, just like we are at ours, is washing our hands. So let's sing that first. Here we go. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush so early in the morning. This is the way we wash our hands, wash our hands, wash our hands. This is the way we wash our hands so early in the morning. What else are you doing a lot of these days? Maybe eating? Shall we do a verse about eating? How could we say it? This is the way we eat our food. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush so early in the morning. This is the way we eat our food, eat our food, eat our food. This is the way we eat our food so early in the morning. What else are you doing a lot of these days? We could probably make a verse about it. Oh, I think this might be something you're doing. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush so early in the morning. This is the way we read our books, read our books, read our books. This is the way we read our books so early in the morning. I hope you have this book at your house too. If you don't, maybe it's one you can get sometime. The title is People, and it's written and illustrated by Peter Spear. Now he's an artist who loves to draw detail in his picture. Look at all those people he drew. There are so many stories right here on the cover. Little groups of people that are dressed the same, standing beside other groups of people that are dressed differently. It represents different people groups around the world. They're holding objects that are familiar to them. Sometimes they have babies, sometimes they have little children, sometimes it's grown-ups standing together, different kinds of hats. So many, many details to see. And each page in the story has as many details on it. You can spend hours looking at a book like this. The first page is a picture of a distant beach, all full of people, and they're flying kites and the lighthouse and sand dunes and so on. And then over here is a picture of a city that is full of vehicles as well as people. So this is in a different part of the world than I live, because in the cities close to me, the people are not supposed to be in the middle of the street along with the vehicles. They take turns, either one or the other. So this picture is happening somewhere else in the world, and you can look at it and try to decide where you think it is. The text here says, we all know that there are lots and lots of people in the world, and many more millions each year. There are now over 6 billion humans on the earth, and if it takes you an hour to finish looking at this book, there will be over 4,000 more. By the year 2050, there will be 9 billion people on the earth. If we all joined hands, the line would be 5,708,806 miles long and would stretch 229 times around the equator, or 24 times the distance to the moon. More than 6 billion people, and no two of them alike. Each and every one of us different from all the others. Each one a unique individual in his or her own right. We come in all sizes and shapes, tall, short, and in between. But without a single exception, we all begin quite small. There's babies from around the world. And we come in many different colors. Even our eyes have different shapes and colors. And each of those eyes is telling a story about the world that is going on inside that person. And noses. Noses come in every shape imaginable. So do faces, lips, and ears, and everything else. Think of our hair, from snow white to pitch black, straight, curly, kinky, and wavy, and a lot of people have no hair at all. People are funny. Some with straight hair want theirs to be wavy, and others with little curls want theirs to be straight. So if you run out of things to do today, you could inspect your family's noses. How are they same, and how are they different? Or maybe their ears. Does your family have ears that resemble each other's? Or do some family members have an ear that is curled or shaped differently than the others? Or you could look at their hair. Their hair might be easier to see from across the room. Maybe they will not appreciate having you right up in their nose. People all around our world wear different clothes. And all of us want to look our best. Still, what is considered beautiful or handsome in one place is considered ugly and even ridiculous elsewhere. And the book goes on, talking about houses and pets and jobs and all kinds of things that you find around the world. It's a great book to have. People by Peter Spear. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush so early in the morning. Sure enough, there are hand signs for mulberry bush too. Here's the first tone. Can you tell me what it is? Well, look at the shape of my hands, right? It'll tell you what note it is. It's do. Here we go round the mulberry bush. Ooh, what was that note? We did a high clap. So we had an open flat hand, right? And an upright open flat hand. We brought them together in a clap. This is the hand sign for so. This is the hand sign for so. So this is the hand sign for so. So it's here we go round the mulberry bush. Do 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 me so me do. Right there it is. Do 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 me so me do. Re 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 ti la so. Do 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 do, mi do re re so la ti do do. See what we did there? We had a high clap, that's the high so, and a low clap is the low so. So we have an octave between the high so and the low so in this song too. High so, low so, do. So we begin the song on do and we end the song on do. That's the kind of melody this song has. And these are the bare bones hand signs. Let's do it one more time. Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush so early in the morning. We read a poem about stars yesterday which reminded me of this one. Now, this is another nice book to have. It's Robert Louis Stevenson's poetry called A Child's Garden of Verses, and it's illustrated by Eric Kincaid. So this is a poem with the title Escape at Bedtime. The lights from the parlor and kitchen shone out through the blinds and the windows and bars, and high overhead and all moving about there were thousands and millions of stars. There ne'er were such thousands of leaves on a tree, nor of people in church or the park, as the crowds of the stars looked down upon me, and that glittered and winked in the dark. The dog and the plough and the hunter and all, and the star of the sailor and Mars, these shone in the sky, and the pail by the wall would be half full of water and stars. They saw me at last, and they chased me with cries, and they soon had me packed into bed. But the glory kept shining and bright in my eyes, and the stars going round in my head. Have you ever had that experience? It's beautiful. Here's another one that I like very much in this book. Let's see. Here it is. The wind. I saw you toss the kites on high and blow the birds about the sky, and all around I heard you pass like ladies' skirts across the grass. Oh, wind a-blowing all day long, oh, wind that sings so loud a song. I saw the different things you did, but always you yourself you hid. I felt you push, I heard you call, I could not see yourself at all. Oh, wind a-blowing all day long, oh, wind that sings so loud a song. Oh, you that are so strong and cold, oh, blower, are you young or old? Are you a beast of field and tree, or just a stronger child than me? Oh, wind a-blowing all day long, oh, wind that sings so loud a song. The end. Now let's review our poems for today. Wild Beasts by Eveline Stein. I think you have this poem so well that I don't need to say much of it. I'll just say the first word in each line, and then you can finish it. Here we go. I, and you, and each, beneath, and you, and I, and then, and I. The end. And now, The Weathers by Thomas Hardy. The weather this past week has been the kind that allowed me to go forth spring muslin dressed too. Did you too? It's been quite warm, hasn't it? The Weathers by Thomas Hardy. This is the weather the cuckoo likes, and so do I, when showers beat tumble the chestnut spikes, and nestlings fly, and the little brown nightingale bills his best, and they sit outside at the traveller's rest, and maids come forth spring muslin dressed, and citizens dream of the south and west, and so do I. This is the weather the shepherd shuns, and so do I, when beeches drip in browns and duns, and thresh and ply, and hill-high tides throb, throw on throw, and meadow rivulets overflow, and drops on gate bars hang in a row, and rooks in families homeward go, and so do I. The end. And now we're ready for our story, Heidi. Let's review where we are so far. Heidi has come to live with her grandfather on the mountain. Her Aunt Diti has gone to the city for a job. Heidi likes the big fir trees behind the hut, and she likes the little bed they made in the loft, made out of hay, inside the little round window, where she can look down the valley while she falls asleep. Then, in the morning, she woke up and there were Peter and the goats outside, ready to go up the mountain for the day, where the goats could eat all the grass and flowers that they liked. Heidi was allowed to go along, and grandfather put a big hunk of bread and cheese into Peter's bag so she could have some lunch with him on the mountain. So she spent a lovely day on the mountain, gathering flowers and seeing the big bird that cried so loudly, and seeing the wonderful sunset that glowed all red and rosy over the mountain peaks. And when she came home, her grandfather was able to tell her the names of the mountains. And now, Heidi, Chapter 4. Shooting down the mountainside. The next morning the sun came out early, as bright as ever, and then Peter appeared with the goats, and again the two children climbed up together to the high meadows, and so it went on day after day until Heidi, passing her life thus among the grass and flowers, was burnt brown with the sun, and grew so strong and healthy that nothing ever ailed her. She was happy too, and lived from day to day as free and light-hearted as the little birds that make their home among the green forest trees. Then the autumn came, and the wind blew louder and stronger, and the grandfather would say sometimes, "Today you must stay at home, Heidi. A sudden gust of the wind would blow a little thing like you over the rocks into the valley below in a moment." Whenever Peter heard that he must go alone, he looked very unhappy, for he saw nothing but mishaps of all kinds ahead, and did not know how he should bear the long, dull day without Heidi. Then, too, there was the good meal he would miss, and besides that, the goats on these days were so naughty and obstinate that he had twice the usual trouble with them, for they had grown so accustomed to Heidi's presence that they would run in every direction and refuse to go on unless she was with them. Heidi was never unhappy, for wherever she was, she found something to interest or amuse her. She liked best, it is true, to go out with Peter up to the flowers and the great bird, but she also found her grandfather's hammering and sawing and carpentering very entertaining, and if it should chance to be the day when the large round goat's milk cheese was made, she enjoyed beyond measure watching her grandfather stir the great cauldron. The thing which attracted her most, however, was the waving and roaring of the 3 old fir trees on these windy days. She would stand underneath them and look up, unable to tear herself away, looking and listening while they bowed and swayed and roared as the mighty wind rushed through them. There was no longer now the warm, bright sun that had shone all through the summer, so Heidi went to the cupboard and got out her shoes and stockings and dress. Then it grew very cold, and Peter would come up early in the morning blowing on his fingers to keep them warm. But he soon left off coming, for one night there was a heavy fall of snow, and the next morning the whole mountain was covered with it, and not a single little green leaf even was to be seen anywhere upon it. There was no Peter that day, and Heidi stood at the little window looking out in wonderment, for the snow was beginning again, and the thick flakes kept falling until the snow was up to the window, and still they continued to fall, and the snow grew higher so that at last the window could not be opened, and she and her grandfather were shut up fast within the hut. Heidi thought this was great fun, and ran from one window to the other. The next day, the snow having ceased, the grandfather went out and shoveled it away from the house, and threw it in such great heaps that they looked like mountains. Heidi and her grandfather were sitting one afternoon on their three-legged stools before the fire when there came a great thump at the door. It was Peter, all white with snow, for he had had to fight his way through deep snowdrifts. He had been determined, however, to climb up to the hut, for it was a week now since he had seen Heidi. "Good evening," he said as he came in. Then he went and placed himself as near the fire as he could, his whole face beaming with pleasure at finding himself there. Heidi looked on in astonishment, for Peter was beginning to thaw all over with the warmth, so that he had the appearance of a trickling waterfall. "Well, General, how goes it with you?" said the grandfather. "Now that you have lost your army, you will have to turn to your pen and pencil." "Why must he turn to his pen and pencil?" asked Heidi immediately, full of curiosity. "During the winter he must go to school," explained her grandfather, "and learn how to read and write. It's a bit hard, though useful sometimes afterwards. Am I not right, General?" "Yes, indeed," assented Peter. Heidi's interest was now thoroughly awakened, and she had so many questions to ask Peter about school, and the conversation took so long that he had time to get thoroughly dry. "Well now, General, you have been under fire for some time and must want some refreshment. Come and join us," said the grandfather as he brought the supper out of the cupboard, and Heidi pushed the stools to the table. There was now also a bench fastened against the wall, for as he was no longer alone, the grandfather had put up seats of various kinds here and there, long enough to hold 2 persons, for Heidi had a way of always keeping close to her grandfather, whether he was walking, sitting, or standing. Peter opened his round eyes very wide when he saw what a large piece of meat Alm Uncle gave him on his thick slice of bread. It was a long time since Peter had had anything so nice to eat. As soon as the pleasant meal was over, he began to get ready for returning home, for it was already growing dark. He had said his good night and his thanks and was just going out when he turned and said, "I shall come again next Sunday, this day week, and my grandmother sent word that she would like you to come and see her some day." It was quite a new idea to Heidi that she should go and pay anybody a visit, and she could not get it out of her head. So the first thing she said to her grandfather the next day was, "I must go down to see the grandmother today. She will be expecting me." "The snow is too deep," answered the grandfather, trying to put her off. Not a day passed but what she said 5 or 6 times to her grandfather, "I must certainly go today. The grandmother will be waiting for me." On the 4th day, when Heidi was sitting on her high stool at dinner with the bright sun shining in upon her through the window, she again repeated her little speech. "I must certainly go down to see the grandmother today, or else I shall keep her waiting too long." The grandfather rose from the table, climbed up to the hayloft, and brought down the thick sack that was Heidi's coverlid, and said, "Come along then." The child skipped out gleefully after him into the glittering world of snow. The old fir trees were standing now quite silent, their branches covered with the white snow, and they looked so lovely as they glittered and sparkled in the sunlight that Heidi jumped for joy at the sight and kept on calling out, come here, grandfather, the fir trees are all silver and gold." The grandfather had gone into the shed, and he now came out dragging a large hand sleigh. Inside there was a low seat, and the sleigh could be pushed forward and guided by the feet of the one who sat upon it, with the help of a pole that was fastened to the side. The old man got in and lifted the child upon his lap. Then he wrapped her up in the sack that she might keep nice and warm, and put his left arm closely around her, for it was necessary to hold her tight during the coming journey. He now grasped the pole with his right hand and gave the sleigh a push forward with his 2 feet. It shot down the mountainside with such rapidity that Heidi thought they were flying through the air like a bird, and shouted aloud with delight. Suddenly they came to a standstill, and there they were at Peter's hut. Her grandfather lifted her out and unwrapped her. "There you are. Now go in, and when it begins to grow dark, you must start on your way home again." Then he left her and went up the mountain, pulling his sleigh after him. Heidi opened the door of the hut and stepped into a tiny room that looked very dark, with a fireplace and a few dishes on a wooden shelf. This was the little kitchen. She opened another door and found herself in another small room. for the place was not a herdsman's hut like her grandfather's, with one large room on the ground floor and a hayloft above, but a very old cottage where everything was narrow and poor and shabby. A table was close to the door, and as Heidi stepped in, she saw a woman sitting at it, putting a patch on a waistcoat, which Heidi recognized at once as Peter's. In the corner sat an old woman, bent with age, spinning. Heidi was quite sure this was the grandmother, so she went up to the spinning wheel and said, "Good day, grandmother. I have come at last. Did you think I was a long time coming?" The old woman raised her head and felt for the hand that the child held out to her, and when she had found it, she passed her own over it thoughtfully for a few seconds, and then said, "Are you the child who lives up with the uncle? Are you Heidi?" "Yes, yes," answered Heidi. "I have just come down in the sleigh with grandfather." "Is it possible? Why, your hands are quite warm. Brigitte, did uncle come himself with the child?" Peter's mother had left her work and risen from the table and now stood looking at Heidi with curiosity, scanning her from head to foot. "I do not know, mother, whether uncle came himself. It is hardly likely. The child probably makes a mistake." But Heidi looked steadily at the woman and said, "I know quite well who wrapped me up in my bed cover and brought me down in the sleigh. It was grandfather." "There was some truth then, perhaps, in what Peter used to tell us of uncle during the summer, when we thought he must be wrong," said the grandmother. "But who would ever have believed that such a thing was possible? I did not think that child would live 3 weeks up there. What is she like, Brigitte?" The latter had so thoroughly examined Heidi on all sides that she was well able to describe her to her mother. Heidi, meanwhile, had not been idle. She had made the round of the room and looked carefully at everything there was to be seen. All of a sudden she exclaimed, "Grandmother, one of your shutters is flapping backwards and forwards. Grandfather would put a nail in and make it all right in a minute. It will break one of the panes some day. Look how it keeps on banging." "Ah, dear child," said the old woman, "I am not able to see it, but I can hear that and many other things besides the shutter. Everything about the place rattles and creaks when the wind is blowing, and it gets inside through all the cracks and holes. The house is going to pieces, and in the night when the 2 others are asleep, I often lie awake in fear and trembling, thinking that the whole place will give away and fall and kill us. There is not a creature to mend anything for us, for Peter does not understand such work." "But why cannot you see, grandmother, that the shutter is loose? Look, there it goes again. See, there, that one." And Heidi pointed to the particular shutter. "Alas, child, I can see nothing, nothing," said the grandmother in a voice of lamentation. "But if I were to go outside and put back the shutter so that you had more light, then you could see, grandmother." "No, no, not even then. No one can make it light for me again." "But if you were to go outside among all the white snow, then surely you would find it light. Just come with me, grandmother, and I will show you." Heidi took hold of the old woman's hand to lead her along, for she was beginning to feel quite distressed at the thought of her being without light. "Let me be, dear child. It is always dark for me now, whether in snow or sun. It will never be light for me again on earth. Never." At these words Heidi broke into loud crying. In her distress she kept on sobbing out, "Who can make it light for you again? Can no one do it? Isn't there anyone who can do it?" The grandmother now tried to comfort the child, but it was not easy to quiet her. Heidi did not often weep, but when she did, she could not get over her trouble for a long while. At last the old woman said, "Dear Heidi, you cannot think how glad I am to hear a kind word when I can no longer see, and it is such a pleasure to me to listen to you while you talk. So come and sit beside me, and tell me what you do up there, and how grandfather occupies his time. I knew him very well in the old days, but for many years now I have heard nothing of him, except through Peter, who never says much." This was a new and happy idea to Heidi. She quickly dried her tears and said in a comforting voice, "Wait, grandmother, till I have told grandfather everything. He will make it light for you again, I'm sure, and will do something so that the house will not fall down. He will put everything right for you." Heidi now began to give a lively description of her life with the grandfather, and of the days she spent on the mountain with the goats, and then went on to tell what she did during the winter, and how her grandfather was able to make all sorts of things, seats and stools and mangers where the hay was put for little Swan and little Bear, besides a new large water tub for her to bathe in when the summer came, and a new milk bowl and spoon. The grandmother listened with the greatest attention, only from time to time addressing her daughter. "Do you hear that, Brigitte? Do you hear what she is saying about the uncle?" The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a heavy thump on the door, and in marched Peter, who stood stock still, opening his eyes with astonishment when he caught sight of Heidi. Then his face beamed with smiles as she called out, "Good evening, Peter." "What, is the boy back from school already?" exclaimed the grandmother in surprise. "I have not known an afternoon to pass so quickly as this one for years. How is the reading getting on, Peter?" "As usual," was Peter's answer. The old woman gave a little sigh. "Ah, well," she said, "I hoped you would have something different to tell me by this time, as you are going to be 12 years old this February." "What was it you hoped he would have to tell you?" asked Heidi, interested in all the grandmother said. "I mean that he ought to have learnt to read a bit by now," continued the grandmother. "Up there on the shelf is an old prayer book with beautiful songs in it that I have not heard for a long time and cannot now remember to repeat to myself, and I hoped that Peter would soon learn enough to be able to read one of them to me sometimes, but he finds it too difficult." Heidi now jumped up from her low chair and, holding out her hand hastily to the grandmother, said, "Good night, grandmother. It is getting dark. I must go home at once." And bidding good-bye to Peter and his mother, she went towards the door. But the grandmother called out in an anxious voice, "Wait, wait, Heidi. You must not go alone like that. Peter must go with you. Have you got something warm to put around your throat?" "I have not got anything to put on," called back Heidi, "but I am sure I shall not be cold." And with that she ran outside and went off at such a pace that Peter had difficulty in overtaking her. The children had taken but a few steps when they saw the grandfather coming down to meet them, and in another minute his long strides had brought him to their side. "That's right, Heidi, you have kept your word," said the grandfather, and then wrapping the sack firmly around her, he lifted her in his arms and strode off with her up the mountain. They had no sooner got inside the hut than Heidi at once began, "Grandfather, tomorrow we must take the hammer and the long nails and fasten grandmother's shutter and drive in a lot more nails in other places, for her house shakes and rattles all over." "We must we? Who told you that?" asked her grandfather. "Nobody told me, but I know it for all that," replied Heidi, "for everything is giving way, and when the grandmother cannot sleep, she lies trembling, for she thinks that every minute the house will fall down on their heads, and everything now is dark for grandmother, and she does not think anyone can make it light for her again. But you will be able to, I am sure, grandfather. Tomorrow we must go and help her. We will, won't we, grandfather?" The child was clinging to the old man and looking up at him in trustful confidence. The grandfather looked down at Heidi for a while without speaking, and then said, "Yes, Heidi, we will do something to stop the rattling. At least we can do that. We will go down about it tomorrow." The child went skipping round the room for joy, crying out, "We shall go tomorrow! We shall go tomorrow!" The grandfather kept his promise. On the following afternoon he brought the sleigh out again, and as on the previous day he set Heidi down at the door of the grandmother's hut and said, "Go in now, and when it grows dark, come out again." Then he put the sack in the sleigh and went round the house. Heidi had hardly opened the door and sprung into the room when the grandmother called out from her corner, "It's the child again! Here she comes!" Heidi ran to her and then quickly drew the little stool close up to the old woman, and seating herself upon it, began to tell and ask her all kinds of things. All at once came the sound of heavy blows against the wall of the hut, and the grandmother gave such a start of alarm that she nearly upset the spinning wheel, and cried in a trembling voice, "Ah, my God, now it is coming! The house is going to fall upon us!" But Heidi caught her by the arm and said soothingly, "No, no, grandmother, do not be frightened. It is only grandfather with his hammer. He is mending up everything so that you shan't have such fear and trouble." "Is it possible? Is it really possible? So the dear God has not forgotten us?" exclaimed the grandmother. "Do you hear, Brigitte, what that noise is? Did you hear what the child says? Go outside, Brigitte, and if it is the alm uncle, tell him he must come inside a moment that I may thank him." Brigitte went outside and found alm uncle in the act of fastening some heavy pieces of new wood along the wall. She stepped up to him and said, "Good evening, uncle. Mother and I thank you for doing us such a kind service, and she would like to tell you herself how grateful she is. I do not know who else would have done it for us. We shall not forget your kindness, for I am sure—" "That will do," said the old man, interrupting her. "I know what you think of alm uncle without your telling me. Go indoors again. I can find out for myself where mending is wanted." Brigitte obeyed on the spot, for uncle had a way with him that made few people care to oppose his will. He went on knocking with his hammer all round the house, and then mounted the narrow steps to the roof and hammered away there, until he had used up all the nails he had brought with him. Meanwhile it had been growing dark, and he had hardly come down from the roof and dragged the sleigh out from behind the goat shed when Heidi appeared outside. The grandfather wrapped her up and took her in his arms as he had done the day before, for although he had to drag the sleigh up the mountain after him, he feared that if the child sat in it alone her wrappings would fall off, and that she would be nearly, if not quite, frozen. So he carried her safe and warm in his arms. So the winter went by. After many years of joyless life, the blind grandmother had at last found something to make her happy. She listened for the little tripping footstep as soon as day had come, and when she heard the door open and knew the child was really there, she would call out, "God be thanked, she has come again." And Heidi had also grown very fond of the old grandmother, and when at last she knew for certain that no one could make it light for her again, she was overcome with sorrow. But the grandmother told her again that she felt the darkness much less when Heidi was with her, and so every fine winter's day the child came travelling down in her sleigh. The grandfather always took her, never raising any objection. Indeed, he always carried the hammer and sundry other items down in the sleigh with him, and many an afternoon was spent by him in making the goatherd's cottage sound and tight. It no longer groaned and rattled the whole night through, and the grandmother, who for many winters had not been able to sleep in peace as she did now, said she should never forget what the uncle had done for her.